Hi folks, and welcome back to the BitTech Modding Toolbox. Today we're going to be taking a look at machine sanding. So previously, Cartier, for this video, we looked at hand sanding, so using sort of traditional abrasive materials and say hand sanders, files, that sort of thing. Today we're going to be taking a look at some machines that range from the sort of basic to the more advanced that can help make this whole task a bit easier, also providing maybe better finishes or certainly more helpful finishes for if you're doing larger panels or just lots and lots of work. So let's jump into it and see what's what. So in front of me are a number of the sanders that I use on quite a regular basis, along with some of the older ones that I've maybe replaced with newer models and other similar kind of upgrades. I'm going to be going from like the more basic models and also the more specific ones for specific tasks, along with the ones that I use generally for larger panels or just volume work, along with some of the other ones, like this belt sander over here, that actually maybe you didn't think you can have at home, but are much more applicable to home use than you might have first thought. So let's go take a look through them individually, and I'll explain some of the details. I'm also going to be going over some of the sanding accessories, such as the pads and grits available, that can help extract the most value and the best finishes out of your equipment. So let's start with the mouse sanders and the sort of more basic ones and show you where we can go from there. So where do you begin if you've never actually owned a machine sander before? Well, for me, I would start with something like this, a Bosch mouse sander. These are particularly handy because the pad size is fairly small, they're easy to get hold of. You can buy them on Amazon or Robert Dias for say £35 or even less. They use standard sized Delta pads, so you can buy those online or at B&Q, so you're not locked into using just Bosch paper. And the handy thing is, because they have a pointed front, it allows you to get into lots of different spaces. So they're quite good for panel work, they're good for edges, and they're also good for corner work. So you can kind of fill all your bases off with just one product. They also come in a handy little box for storage, so you can put all your various accessories and gubbins in there and keep it out of the way. Function-wise, this sander uses a random orbital motion, so it's going to leave quite a smooth finish if you're using medium to light grits. Although the only issue there is because you're using a Delta sander, quite often they don't come with the finer grits on this one, so you'll have no trouble getting maybe 60 to 80 grit or even going up to 200 because they're usually used for wood. Maybe getting hold of 600 or higher is quite difficult. I've not really found higher than 240, but they might be available locally for you. The way that it works, they have little holes here so that the dust can get pulled from here into this little collection device at the back. You can take that off, put it into the bin, bring it back. It does work okay. I'd say if you're using dustier materials, something like MDF or various woods, it will help, but it will also not get rid of all the dust. There will be things around, so maybe, especially if you're doing MDF, I would consider using a mask because it does get around the place. But if you're just doing light sanding jobs here and there, then it's not really going to be a concern and it's going to work quite well for you. So as I mentioned, this mouse sander takes standard Delta pads. But what are those other Delta pads used for? Well, a good one is something like this. So this is the one that I've upgraded to from Festool. The handy thing about these ones is that they're simply much beefier. They're much more powerful, and you're going to be able to get more reasonable finishes in a shorter space of time at the cost of the fact that they're a bit bigger, they're more power hungry, you need probably a whole lot of other accessories such as a dust extractor really to make use of them properly. But if you're going to be doing this a lot, or say you've got a very large DIY job, maybe you need to sand down the stairs or a front porch or something like that, actually you might save a lot of money by buying one of these really nice sanders and doing it yourself than getting someone else in maybe to do it who's an expert and already has these tools. It's an optional way of looking at it. It's the way I took for these projects. I found it's much easier if I can use something like this with all the accessories and parts instead of something a bit more basic like this one. It means that I can get the same work done in about a third of the time to a higher finish, and I can be much more consistent in the way that I approach a project now. So these Festool ones come with a sustainer box. These are quite good because they stack up and you can put them on top of the extractors. They have a modular cable system. So this is great for anti-tangle. The same tools use the same cables, so you only need one cable to be plugged in at any moment. You can swap between different ones if you have a larger ecosystem. But the best bit is the dust extraction. So this is one of the things that Festool prides themselves on, is having minimal dust in the area. Basically, you can either attach a Festool dust extractor or another brand, it depends which one you have or which one's available to you, to this tube, and then when it's turned on, it will suck all the air through the little holes at the bottom, which are used with the same Delta pads that I mentioned here, leaving your work surface nice and clean, also making sure that the environment is clean, it's not going into your lungs, and it's better that way for all the materials that you're likely to use. especially the more fibrous ones, because you don't want MDF dust getting absolutely everywhere. It's very dangerous, and it really does get everywhere. You can find it on all the surfaces if you've done some maybe work in the kitchen or similar. It's just a nightmare to work with. This makes things a lot easier because it basically turns your sander into a vacuum at the same time. But what if you have an awful lot of panel work that you need to do? Maybe you're going to be taking a side panel and repainting it, so you want to get it nice and smooth, or you may be stripping the paint so you can redo it or do a powder coat, something like that. You're probably going to want a sander that's more capable, that will make the job faster, easier, won't give you an aching arm, and leave you with a better finish. So a good place to start is something like this. So I've got a Dewalt random orbital sander here. Now, this one's quite interesting because whilst it does have a mild form of dust extraction built into it, that only works if you use the standard pads, which have holes drilled in the bottom of them, so it actually matches up with the holes at the bottom of the sander. But this one has handy little clamps on it, so you can use standard paper rolls with it. The best thing about that is if you're doing a sanding work of something that maybe clogs up the material quite a lot, say you're doing a wood panel that's been previously treated with beeswax or a similar kind of finish, you'll find a lot of those varnishes and finishes will clog up sanding pads, even rough ones, quite fast. If you're using a standard paper roll, you can just buy a whole roll of the stuff, maybe 10 meters, chop it up to size, you take the actual clamps, you undo them, you put the new paper in, that's all there is to it. Now, of course, you can also step up from this one to an even beefier type of system. So that's what I've done because I do quite a lot of large panels in both metal and other materials. So I've got one of these, which is a Festool RO125 EQ geared eccentric sander. So what separates this one from something like this? Well, a lot of it's going to be down to the ecosystem. I like the Festool ecosystem because it all ties together very simply, means I can swap tools very quickly, painlessly, and I can use the accessories from one to another. But if you don't have any of that ecosystem, obviously you can start looking at anybody on the market. Mirka is a good example. They're much more available in Europe than they are in the UK. I found that I can't easily get hold of their sanding pads here. I can get the tools. A lot of them are more geared towards air sanding though, and I don't really have the room for a compressor that's suitable for something like that. So I've gone with an electric option, and which is why I went for the Festool one. The handy thing about the Festool option here is that it comes with two different sanding modes. The first one is the eccentric mode, which basically has a sort of a similar to a random orbital motion on the pad itself, except it's going round in a circle. The good thing about that is it's very good for fine sanding if you're using the really fine grits. Pads here can go up to maybe 2000 grit even, or even higher if you go to different manufacturers, which means it's really good for polishing work and fine finishing. But you also have the option of rotary. Now that's something you don't get with a system like one of these. One of the really handy things about having both the geared eccentric motion and the rotary motion is that you can use rotary for polishing as well. So you can use the same sanding device both to sand the panels down and then also to polish them with the related accessories. To switch from sanding, all you need to do is just swap out the pad on the top. You've got different accessories that I'll be going through later, which can show you exactly the kind of thing that you can do, but it's really convenient just being able to have both of those options in the same device. Like with the Delta sander, one of the handy things that comes with the Festool one is that you do have variable speed control, so you can change things from being very light sanding to really heavy depending on what material, or alternatively if you're doing polishing work you can change the speed of that because some materials perform much better with a higher speed than others. If you're doing, for instance, acrylic, you want to have quite a low speed because otherwise you risk melting the surface of the material. If you're doing metals, maybe a higher speed, something like that. It also comes with a modular power cable, which is great because it means you can just have one cable between all the other devices, as I mentioned earlier. It also has the full dust extraction capability. The only issue, of course, is that if you want to be able to use the dust extraction, you have to make sure that you're using the same pattern on the papers. These are quite a standard size, so you can actually get multiple ones from different manufacturers, but I like to stick to the Festool ones just for the ease of use and because they're actually very available for me, so I can get them online delivered quite fast should I run out. So far I've been focusing on the handheld tools, but of course there's a whole range of devices designed specifically to work with worktops, countertops, or even freestanding, such as this belt sander here. Now I love this one because it's so small. It's really convenient because I can put this on the side and it doesn't take up a huge amount of space. It's pretty inexpensive. I think I picked it up for about £75, and they're very, very capable. They use standard sized, I think 700 by 1 inch belts, so you can use one of these. These are easy to purchase online, and you can get them in a whole different variety of grits, ranging from 60 all the way up to 2000, because there's a whole sort of hobby knife making scene out there that uses all the different grits, so they tend to cater to that. You can even get leather strops for doing kind of polishing work, or if you're going to be doing actual bladesmithing at home, still a good option. The other handy thing about this one is that it comes with a little disc sander on the side here. And this one has a variable table, so you can change the angle of the cut itself. So it's great for making little bevels, maybe if you want to add a nice flush to the outside of a metal panel, or if you're going to be taking some acrylic and you want to make sure it's nice and smooth in a join, you can use that for that purpose. Again, you just stick standard size pads onto these ones. This is, I think, 125 millimeters, so I can actually use my pads from my Festool system in the same thing, obviously without any dust extraction, but it will still work. Now, why would you maybe think of buying a belt sander, especially if you're doing just the home shop? Well, for me, the fact that it's A, not that expensive and is quite small is a very compelling argument, and B, they're very, very good for getting nice straight edges, especially if combined with using, like, say, a cutting template or similar. You can get very precise cuts using one of these, because once you've roughed it down, you have a lot more control. When you're doing it by hand, your pressure can change, you can rock back and forth, even if it's held down firmly in a vise or against the table, it's quite difficult to get a really straight line and a straight cut. With the belt sander, you've got both hands on the material, the sanding is all handled by the machine itself, so you've got complete control and you can move the material very freely, and you don't have to worry about it maybe rocking in one direction or another. All you have to think about is the table surface flat, is it level, and is it going to be able to get a good cut? As for the belts themselves, I found they last a very long time. I think I've had this one belt in here maybe 3 to 4 months, and I do use this quite a lot. The other handy thing is they're really good for tubing. So if you've got, say, a lot of tubing that you need to trim down to very specific lengths, I find you can take maybe 2 to 3 millimeters off in just a few seconds on one of these devices. So you can trim it, just quickly give it a quick chamfer, put it in, see does it fit. If it doesn't, just go back, do it again, and it's only a few seconds. If you're doing that by hand, it takes a lot longer, especially if you're trying to cut very, very small amounts. If you're trying to use like a tubing pipe cutter or a hacksaw, trying to remove 2 millimeters from the end of a tube, that's very difficult. On a sander, easy peasy. The other thing, of course, if you're using metal tubing, especially if you're using the thick sort of brass alpha cool style tubing, that is very difficult to trim down to the exact sizes if you're just maybe taking off 1 millimeter at a time. On one of these belt sanders, it's quite easy. It also makes it much quicker to do the beveling all around the outside to a smoother level than you can get with a chamfering tool. Of course, no machine abrasive video will be complete without everyone's favorite starter modding tool, the Dremel. Now, this is actually my starter Dremel. I got this one when I first started modding, well, shortly afterwards anyway, and it has lasted me all this time, but that's mostly because I don't use it very much. If I'm honest, I don't have a huge number of uses for a Dremel, certainly not anymore, but even before I had all these other tools, I didn't use it very often. If I was cutting panels, I'd probably use a handsaw over a Dremel instead. It's actually going to be less work and you'll probably get a cleaner result with less refinishing afterwards, but they do have their uses. So I've got the flexible arm set up on this one, and you can use these little drum sanding attachments. They're quite good for if you're going to be maybe sanding the inside of a hole, if you're doing corners, or if you want to deburr something, or if you just want to like take an edge off. The other handy thing is, of course, they do come with all the other accessories. So you can get cut-off discs, the sanding discs, abrasive discs, and all manner of different things you can put on there, including buffing pads for polishing and stuff like that. So it's very much a multitasking tool, but it's also a bit of a jack of all trades. So if you want to do something really well, I would consider looking at the specific tools for the job if possible. Dremels are not cheap, but certainly not anymore. So I would definitely consider looking at the other dedicated options. They're still not bad, but if you compare it to, say, the mouse sander that we showed earlier for £35, you'll get much better results from that for even doing edges and things like that, which you think would be quite good for one of these. So I would take a look at what you're actually going to be using it for. If you need it for lots of different purposes, then a Dremel's quite a good idea, but for sanding, you're not going to get a huge amount out of it, most likely. So I mentioned there's a lot of accessories available for sanding. Most of these take the form of different pads designed for different materials, different machines, or different purposes and finishes that you're trying to achieve. Let's take a look at a few of the different ones here. The ones that I use the most are these general sort of granite pads from Festool. These ones fit my particular machine, but they'll also fit a load of other different machines. I've even used them for hand sanding because they're generally just quite good abrasives. The ones that I've got here range from 80 grit all the way up to this very, very fine 1500 grit. Great for if you're doing lots of polishing, if you want to get metals smooth, woods, that sort of thing. Now, the other option is you can go with something like this, which is a soft pad. So these are platin, again, from Festool, because I have their ecosystem, it makes sense to keep to it. But if you're used to bowling and you do 10-pin bowling and you need to redo your bowling balls, then you'll know about Merca Abralon, which is the same sort of thing. It's a soft pad that you stick onto your sander, or you can use by hand, that basically allows it to contour around materials and gives a very soft finish. The thing about this one is that you use these differently to these ones. These ones are best suited for use with a random orbital or an eccentric motion, whereas these ones you want to use in rotary. It leaves a better finish and also allows the pad to last a lot longer, as I found. The thing is, these ones range from about 400 grit all the way to 4000 grit, so really they're for polishing. If you're going to be doing clear coats, paint work, or trying to polish up metal to like a mirror finish, these are the sort of pads you're going to want to use. They come in a variety of different fashions. They can range from small sizes such as 90mm all the way up to a stonking 200mm in size if you've got an absolutely massive sander maybe designed for finishing the hulls of boats or similar. I've got a fairly small one, so I use these 125mm pads. Now, of course, you can just use sanding, but some of the machines like my one are also suited up for polishing. So you can get things like these, which are polishing sponges, or in this case, for acrylics, a polishing felt. You've also got lamb's wools that I've used for metals and similar kind of things like that. Basically stick one of these to the machine itself and then apply a polishing compound such as one like this, and then you can use that for buffing the actual surfaces themselves. You want to try and make sure that you match up the pad to the finish and to the material that you're going to be using. So you don't want to use a pad that's maybe too hard or too soft, will generate too much friction. If you use, say, a felt pad on the wrong kind of lacquer, it might melt the surface, so you won't get a polish, instead you'll get a smeared look. Alternatively, if you use the wrong kind of thing, maybe a fibrous finish, it will leave things on the surface, and you don't want to mar a finish like that. If you're using maybe a traditional method such as French polishing, I wouldn't do that, stick to that by hand. If you're going to be doing lacquers and maybe clear coats and paint work, you want to make sure that you're not going to be swapping sponges as well. You want to have a sponge that's just dedicated to that purpose. Because if you say get metal filings into the surface of a clear coat, it's just going to ruin it. You won't be able to get rid of it, so you have to sand it down, repaint it, reapply it, and do it all over again. So it makes sense to have maybe just a few different ones, see what's available, see what will work for you. Now, previously I also mentioned dust extraction. So let's take a look at that now. This is one of the most significant upgrades that I think you can do to a machine sanding section, which is get a proper dust extractor that works with it. Now, I've got quite a large one because I use this with my CNC machine, but they do come in much smaller varieties, and of course they all come from different manufacturers. Just choose one which maybe suits your budget, suits your needs and your capabilities. You don't need to go for the very top one. Those are mostly going to be using for hazardous materials. Maybe just something which is going to be strong, reliable, and you can use with a bunch of different tools. The principle is it's basically like a big, strong vacuum cleaner. You then plug it straight into the tool itself, and then when you switch it on, it will turn on the extractor, pull the dust through the sander itself into the chamber in the bottom over here. That keeps it out of the air, keeps it away from the work surface, and keeps it away from you. The best thing about all of this is the fact that there's not just one reason for doing it. So you not only achieve a better surface finish by not having any dust present, you're also going to be making sure that the dust doesn't get spread all around the room that you're working in, especially bad if you're working indoors. And also, if the dust isn't flying around, you're not going to be breathing it in, and it's going to be easier to work in the environment, especially if you're going to be doing it for longer. Safety is quite an important thing with sanding, because obviously if you do breathe in a lot of dust, it's going to be really bad for you, even on a short term. If you're working with MDF, the stuff gets absolutely everywhere. You don't want it in your lungs. It's the same thing with aluminium. It does get around. It's maybe not as visible as with MDF because it's not as fibrous, but you definitely don't want it spread all around the room and getting into your fingers and everything like that. A system like this will really, really help you there. Similarly, it's worth pointing out the other safety things that you probably want to consider. So I would definitely advise wearing some goggles, because again, dust does get everywhere. Some safety specs, it's always a good idea if you're working with any form of machine, but sanding, I would particularly recommend it because the stuff does fly around a bit. If you're going to be doing quite a bit of sanding, a pair of these ear defenders is a really good idea, because if you're going to be doing this for maybe 1 or 2 hours, that's quite loud, and especially if you've got like a belt sander, those things are not quiet. I would thoroughly recommend getting a pair of these. They're only a few pounds. They will save your ears, and later on you won't be complaining that you've now got tinnitus because you've spent all the time sanding down your case mod. If you're not going to be using a dust extractor, definitely consider getting a dust mask, because that way you're not going to be breathing in all the dust as you're generating it. It's not as big a deal when you're going to be using a hand sander, but if you're doing machine sanding, the material removal rate is so much higher, it really does get everywhere. So it's worth, definitely worth considering. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought if you're maybe considering changing from just hand sanding to going to machine sanding, or if you already have a machine sander, maybe adding to your arsenal, looking at different options that maybe will work for you. Also, if you just need to be able to justify getting one of these machines to somebody, maybe it's giving you some ammunition in that. I'll see you next time.